Oh, yeah?
Main Grove and Fun Grove.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What's up, Mark?
Hi, everybody. Is it yours? I'd like to help. Let me close the door so you can start.
Yeah, I don't know if we're still waiting.
It says live.
I'd say we're good.
Okay,
I don't know where it's going.
do we, did anybody know?
Yeah, you want to use that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure everyone's understanding the instructions. Okay.
Yeah, my seat.
Can somebody just confirm, please? I think I did it. That's all I'm doing. So the first couple seconds of it starts with me. That's fine. All right, guys. So we're gonna go ahead and get started here. So I thought as we're getting started that I would maybe do a little bit of an introduction about like who I am and kind of where some of this my topic for tonight is coming from. So so I am a counselor, and so part of that is that, well, first of all, I'm very passionate about what I do, and um, and for me that means that I'm constantly like looking for ways to be like healing people, the people that I interact with, but in particularly my clients, um, and and I have the opportunity to see Jesus in that. And I have the opportunity to see how, like, my profession, like the skills that we use, like, are biblical. It's a really neat thing. Like, sometimes I'm like, I learn new things and I think, wow, that is like Jesus. And so that's really where a lot of what I'm going to be sharing tonight comes from is me taking like what I have learned from having a master's degree and like years of experience as a counselor, but then also taking like what I know of the Father and also this culture and kind of like fusing it together. So that's kind of what we're looking at here tonight. And so in particular, something that's been um, on my heart is the idea of thoughts, and the power of our thoughts. Um, Thoughts are often, to me, like an unseen source for our daily lives. Like I don't know how often we like are really thinking about thinking. I know that's, but really, a lot of like our day to day can be like unconscious like we just are like in habits of thinking, and we don't really consider it. Or even like we have ways that we like are used to like viewing ourselves in the world around us, and it's just it works, and so and then we get in these habits, and we just don't really think about it. And then really how you think is how you're gonna like is the direction kind of you're headed in. So a big piece of this again is going to be that I want us to be more intentional about how we're thinking. So that really this very like our minds are a very powerful tool, and if we're just letting them kind of do whatever they want, then they'll do whatever they want, and it'll be like directionless. But then it also, if it's harnessed in the right way and we're giving direction, it's powerful in the right direction, and then we ourselves can be empowered. Like how we're feeling about ourselves, all those pieces can more easily fall into line. So I'm hoping that we can take this part that maybe we don't always think about or isn't always in our awareness, and bring it more into our awareness in our day-to-day, like for ourselves individually, but like as part of like our culture, so that we're like guarding that part of ourselves, not just me, but like if I'm having a thought or I'm expressing a thought that isn't true or isn't helpful, that somebody would point that out to me and say, hey, let's bring this back into line with what truth looks like. So that's kind of where we're headed tonight. So I thought I would start off with, I had actually looked up what the word, like words for thought in the Bible. And so there's like several different words. But the ones that kind of jumped out to me here, and again, pronunciation, I don't know anything, but it's going to be pneuma, I believe, and it's a Greek word, and again, it's the word for thought, and it's a mental perception, but there's also an evil purpose, pneuma. And then the other one that actually even more caught my attention is dialogismos, which I feel like, you hear the word dialogue in there. Another Greek word, and that is for deliberating with yourself or questioning what is true. And I think that really connects to where I see it sometimes we are like dialoguing with ourselves and questioning and thinking what is true. And an important piece for us to be aware of is that just because we think something doesn't mean it's true. And so having that like brought into alignment there. Okay, so yeah. All right, so the next part that I'm going to talk about is going to be specifically, I guess, more related to counseling. So it's actually, so there's this thing, they call it CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's going to sound super like practical, but there's this idea, they call it the cognitive triangle, okay? So just go with me on this, but it's going to be kind of an example of in the day-to-day, like thoughts as a source and the impact that it can have. And it connects our thoughts to our feelings and our actions. And when I was looking actually at the biblical framework for that, and I know that we've talked about this before, but our hearts think. All of this is like connected inside of us, and so sometimes those things are sourced as like in our mind, but then it travels to our heart, and those things are connected. So the cognitive triangle, and I know that sounds super like weird, but actually is a really great depiction of what that looks like. So just go with me on this nerdy adventure here. Okay, so the idea of the cognitive triangle is that we have a thought. Okay, great. Thought goes up here. And from that thought, we have a feeling. And from that feeling, usually that's how we, like, our actions happen. So. So the idea is that based off of whatever your initial thought is to some stimuli, whatever it is that's happening around you, or you know, you're thinking about, whatever that initial thought is, it can shape your feelings, and then your feelings can shape how you're gonna act. So, and again, there's a lot of ways that this plays out. This plays out in relationships, so like how I'm interacting with people around me, how I think about myself, and then even like how I'm thinking about like the Father. Like there's ways that like our thoughts shape our perceptions and our feelings, and then we act on them. And so that's the skill and the thing that we want to be more aware of, and I'm going to hope to show maybe a different way of catching those thoughts, taking those thoughts captive, and bringing them into truth. So we'll get to that, but first I'm going to give some examples here of like how this can play out, maybe in an unhealthy way. So remembering thoughts, feelings, actions, got it. I'm gonna then give an example. And my kids at work are probably tired of it because I use the same example all the time. They know the cognitive triangle. But so I usually think about like social interactions first. Okay, so you walk past somebody and you say hi to them and they don't say back. Say hi back. Okay, so that's like the first. Okay, hold on, sorry, I'm putting that up there, but that's the event. Sorry. So that's the initial event. So you say hi to somebody and they don't say hi back. Your thought could be they don't like me, or you know, they are not my friend anymore, whatever that could look like. So there's a thought there. Or maybe like even like they're angry with me. Okay, so that's the thought you have. From there, what's a feeling you have?
Anger.
Mm-hmm.
Sadness.
Anger, sadness. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. So then from there, if your feeling with that person is anger, sadness, and rejection, how are you going to act towards them? Yeah, so maybe you're like the next time I see them, I'm not even going to say hi to start with. So like avoidance. And even like there, like that's the very beginning of a wall. And this is why these things are so important for us to be aware of, because really we're not always aware of these things. We're just not. Like these are things that happen in our subconscious brain all the time. You're walking around, somebody doesn't say hi back to you, and the next time you're like, well, I'm just not gonna say hi to them. Bing bang boom, it happens in seconds. And then the next time you see that person, next thing you know, you're just gradually, and then the next interaction you have with them, if they were to do something else, it adds to that. And so then we just slowly are building walls. And then and then like months later, you're like, wait, what happened? You're realizing that your relationship with that person is changed or different, or you haven't talked to them. And you go back and you're like, oh my gosh, it started there. And then just all these things, just I wasn't paying attention. and this is what happened. Okay, so that's a basic example there. Ideally, we want to do something which is called reframing. Again, I know it maybe seems a little silly to be using all these like counseling terms, but it's what it's called.
I'm learning.
And this is another thing that my kids are tired of hearing me say, because they'll say things like, I can't do that, or, you know, like, things like that, and I'll just say, reframe that, please. And they're like, Miss Julia. But it's important. It's important, and so, anyways, okay, so that same scenario, if we reframe it, so we said hi to this person and they didn't say hi back. What's another thought that you could have? Yeah, they didn't hear me. What else?
Something's going on in them.
Yeah. Okay, so those are two like really basic, probably more healthy thought processes that you could have that aren't like based off the idea that like I've done something wrong or they've done something wrong. Yeah, okay, so. So then, if that's our thought, what's the feeling going to be?
Like compassion for them, if something's happening, if they were not willing to or not able to respond to you.
Compassion, or even like if you're thinking that they didn't hear you.
Grab them and say, did you hear me?
Yeah.
I said hello.
Great. But okay, so either if you're thinking that something's going on with them, you might have a reaction of compassion. You might then pursue them. Or if you're thinking that they didn't hear you, you might just say, "Oh, they didn't hear me," and the mood that you were in before, the feeling that you were feeling before, stays the same. So there's content, calm, whatever. Okay. And I realized that I maybe kind of gave away the action. You get away with this one. Okay, so if my feeling is compassion, then maybe like pursuit is my response. And even in the contentment case, probably like you're just going to continue your relationship as it was before. So I guess that's an initial example of just relationally how, like, with one thought, it has one outcome, and with another thought, it has a completely different outcome.
He is not avoiding you.
Okay, so I want to give a couple more examples here. I won't walk all the way through them because I don't think we need to do that. But just to like, because again, I don't think that this is just a relational thing, and it could show up differently for everybody in here.
Before we do anything else, can I just ask a question? Usually in a triangle, we go back up to the top. I had that same question.
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
are we ahead of you? Or
No.
no? Okay.
No.
Are you gonna get to that?
Hmm?
Are you gonna get to that? 'Cause I could get to that.
What? This
Taking
I
that
could draw
action.
another.
Taking that action back up to another thought.
Okay.
At some point in time, I'm just saying, I see how it works, but I was waiting for you to tell me how it works. To see if how I thought it worked.
We'll put a pin in it and we'll come back.
Yeah, because maybe you're seeing something that I'm not. But
But
I
your
don't-
initial example, like it started with an action, right? You
Mhm.
saying hi, okay, they say hi back. So
Mhm.
that was an action that was just, maybe one you weren't processing or thinking about, but that did kick off the thought. So there is like they all relate.
And I guess, potentially, I'm guessing what you're getting at, let me see if I can guess this, okay, is that based off the actions, it can fuel those same thought processes and can be an endless cycle.
Yeah. And it seems also that all 3 points go both ways. Like my feelings definitely affect my thoughts.
Mhm.
You know, and actions do as well, but like feelings affect thoughts. So actions affect feelings.
Yeah, and like your actions towards that person might
Impact your feelings.
it might make them act the way that you thought originally,
Mhm.
you know, and like just keep fueling.
I've caught myself stopping there and going backwards.
Hmm.
You understand? Like, visiting the emotion again,
Mhm.
and then reliving that.
Mhm.
Just, just feeling it more and feeling it more.
Mhm. Yeah, so like there doesn't even need to be like another event. It can just be that you're like remembering the feeling that you felt during that interaction. But yeah, it can be a cycle, and I'm aware that like sometimes this triangle doesn't go always in the same way. But I guess like for the direction I was headed tonight, I was just going to be like specifically like about thoughts. But again, it does all like mingle together. We're like those parts of us are not separated. Okay, so another example here, because this is I really feel that the relational piece is important. I also really am passionate about how this impacts how we view ourselves. Because really, I think that throughout the course of our experience, people say things to us, or we have like an experience where we're like, we try something we don't do so well, and then we're like, well, I don't have that skill, or I'm bad at that. And then we like take something that was never really part of like who we are, and we like latch onto it, and like we take it and we like stitch it onto our arms, and we're like, that's there now, and it's not really true. And so like an example would be, I have always been told, and I've always viewed myself as somewhat introverted, like just kind of like not really like an outgoing kind of person, and this is months ago now, but the Lord was kind of like, can you just show me where introverted is in the Bible? Like, can you show me like where I put that in your identity? Like, can you point that out for me? And I was like, oh man, this is like not really like maybe this is something that I've struggled with because of past experiences. Like being around people, making small talk is not easy for me all the time because of my childhood experiences. Does that mean that I'm not meant to be social? No. It's probably a cop-out. And so for me, like I've had to challenge that thought and that belief about myself. But I guess like what I'm getting at here is that I want to encourage us to be thinking, what are areas of like who I believe myself to be that like were never meant? Or even like it could be something that like for now was good, like it worked, or it might be true in the moment, like but then there's a new layer of things, and those things can't be like permanent parts. Like there could be new things that we're learning, and we can't just say, well, I can't do this new thing because my identity is still that old thing. Like like challenging that. Okay, so thinking of an example of something that might happen with. Okay. So let's say that on a Sunday you get up and share something with Mike, and nobody comes up to you and tells you what a great like word it was. Like nobody like affirms it, nobody pats you on the back, and your thought is, I screwed up. I know nothing. I don't hear from the Lord. Like those kinds of thoughts. Okay, so let's go with that one. So you're having a thought of like, nobody got value from what I shared. And so then, again, that's probably gonna be a feeling of rejection, self-doubt, hurt, we could go on with that. Sadness, anger again, just depending on who you are, is depending on how you're feeling to respond to that. What would be the action based off of those kinds of thoughts and feelings?
I'm not gonna share you.
And I know that like when we write them down and think about them, like sometimes when we like say thoughts out loud like this, it seems like, wow, that's really dramatic. But do we really think like this? Like really we do.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like I again, like when we write it out, it's like, man, who thinks like that? But it's like, but I do.
Yeah.
I do think like that, you know? And so this is just something that like we have to be mindful of, is like just in that quick, again, it happens in seconds. Hi again. But it happens in seconds. And then that's going to shape how you interact with our family, how you contribute, like how you view yourself as a member of our family. So like feeling like, well, I'm just meant to sit down and be quiet. Like those kinds of thoughts, those kinds of habits form. Okay. So then the last one, I guess I would say, or I just want to give another example here. So we talked about relationships. We talked about identity. And then I also just want to talk about like how we view the Father.
What was the identity example? I just want to remember it.
Okay, so it was if I share on the mic on Sunday.
Oh, that was it?
Yeah, yeah.
That was the identity one? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
Okay.
just want to make sure I connected the identity with that particular example.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, and I guess that one might not clearly be like identity related, but I guess
It's more like
It's how you think about
interpersonal,
yourself.
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, I just want to make sure I was
Yeah, I just okay.
with you.
All right. So then the last one here, just how we do Father. Okay, so and the example that I thought of for this one, because I actually thought in this spot, which is when we're praying for something and we don't necessarily see the results we want. So like a very concrete example would be if we're like praying for healing for something. So like on a Sunday or whatever it is that you're like praying for healing for something or someone, and you don't see that immediate result. Again, we're gonna be going in the non-productive direction first before we go on to other stuff. So in a negative direction, the thought could be, the Lord isn't who he says he is. The feeling from that can be like an emptiness, like a trust being broken. Any other feelings you guys can think of that would go there?
aloneness.
What I hear many times in this scenario is like, well, he does it for other people, but he doesn't do it for me. So I don't know if that's a comparison
Yeah.
or if that's a thought.
Or lack of favor even. I've heard people say that other people have favor in prayer, but I must not have the favor of the Lord. He isn't answering.
Which, like, I see what you're saying, that like how that can be thought, but I think that like those like, there's not really a word for that, but there is a feeling of being like, I'm comparing myself to you and I'm not getting the same result, like that feeling, yeah. Yeah, I'm not thinking of a word, like a feeling word to go with that, so we'll just stick with it. But, okay, so then what action goes with that?
And it can be detachment.
I'm sorry,
Detachment.
detachment. Mhm,
Isolation.
mhm. I'm like getting a little sloppy with my writing.
It's still better than Mark's.
I was gonna do myself. I was gonna say myself. Thanks for,
What's your thought on that?
I think I'm having a thought right now. It's really a feeling.
It's a great exercise.
I'm gonna throw something at Reese. Looking for the right thing.
Please, hit the right button. I haven't thought about it.
Okay,
Can I just confirm, who are we detaching and isolating from? When you guys right there.
Yeah.
Got it. Just wanna make sure.
and then I also see this as, well, like, if I am praying for healing and I'm not seeing instant results, and my belief then is like, or a feeling is being alone and detached, I'm probably not gonna be as likely to pray for healing again and to continue to pursue that thing. Again, but that's if my belief is that he isn't who he said he is, or like I'm not capable of being like the presence of healing Jesus to this person. Like if that's my thought, that's kind of how that would play out. So, okay, so those were the like kind of examples of the different ways that I wanted to lay out here. I guess then the thought is, well, like, so what next? Yeah. So like I said, it's gonna be, the word for it is reframing. The Bible talks about it being taking every thought captive. Which I'm gonna have that pulled up on my computer here, so I'll just read that to you real quick. I went to sleep, hold on. Okay. And I'll give you actually, because I've researched this out pretty good as far as looking for biblical ways that we see, like, that Jesus talked about this. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm like.
Oh, I thought you were before, sorry.
No, I have it pulled up. Yeah, okay. So as Mark said, it is 2 Corinthians 10:5. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So for me, like I can see the instant connection here of taking the thoughts that are like kind of going astray and bringing them back into obedience of Christ. Some other ones here that I had for us. So I also looked at Philippians 4:7. The peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So there's a way that we can guard our hearts and minds. And again, that's kind of where I want to go next. One more. Okay, the other one that I had was, I was looking at Romans 12. And that's the verse that talks about renewing our minds. So Romans 12, actually, verse 2, it says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you may prove that the will of God is that which is good and acceptable and perfect. So for me, when I'm reading this, Romans 12 led me to think that renewing our minds is this practice of, like, habitually, however often that might be, like taking our minds to the Lord and having them renewed, restored, and having Him bring our awareness to areas where our thoughts are maybe out of alignment. And for me, that's an important practice to be in. And it's a constant practice. And then the Corinthians verse, the 2 Corinthians 10:5, that speaks to me of more specifically the day-to-day practice of taking the thoughts that I'm having throughout my day and just making sure that I'm being aware of them. My thoughts aren't just happening without my knowledge or consent, and I'm bringing them like into the truth. Okay, so some things with that then, and I actually thought about it kind of like a garden. All right, so your mind is a garden. You got to weed the garden, right? Like weed the garden, and when you do that, like it allows other things, the things you want to grow. But we kind of have to take out the trash. So with that. We're going to talk specifically about what it looks like to reframe, but also like kind of the measure that we're looking at when we're judging our thoughts. So the things the two kind of criteria that I look at when I'm thinking about thoughts is it true? And is it helpful? One, because we want to be thinking things that are true. That's important. Like we want to be measuring our thoughts to what the Father says about us, what the Word says. We want to be measuring against that. But we also want to know, like, is this something that's going to be helpful to me? Like I'm thinking this. Is this even helpful? Because something can be true, but not very helpful. For example, recently, somebody told me that they were dumb. They're like, I'm dumb. And I was like, well, whether or not that's true, is that a very helpful thought to be having for you? Like, is that going to like help you in your academic pursuits? Is that going to like make you feel good about yourself? Is that like, no, probably not. Those kinds of thoughts, like if we indulge them, they're not going to bear fruit. They're not going to be very productive. It just leads down kind of this like thorny pathway. So in this like increased awareness of our, like in our day to day, if we're practicing this out, we're more aware of what we're thinking. And when you notice something that doesn't seem quite right, then you pause and go, well, was that true? Or was that helpful? And from there, then you can like kind of work on replacing the thought. Replacing the thought with something true, something more helpful, something that's actually going to bring light, rather than bring actions that aren't matching with what we want, with our identity, with what your goals are. We want more thoughts that are going to bear fruit. And we get to choose that. Like, it's not like this like helpless thing that it's like, well, I think what I think, and then it's like, whatever. No, like we get to choose, how we're gonna think and how we're gonna view ourselves and the people around us. But it takes a practice. And I know, like, as I was thinking about bringing this, this teaching, I thought, man, this is gonna seem very practical. like I know that like practical is not typically what we do. Like I know that like me, like giving a prescription for like, here, this is what we're gonna do for the next 30 days, you know, like that kind of thing. It seems kind of strange, but really, like when it comes to this kind of a practice of like reversing habits, it really almost does have to be like, first this, then this.
I agree.
Great. So we're gonna be a little bit practical here. So I would say that step one is knowing which thoughts are problematic for you. And maybe you already like are aware of that. If you're not, I would encourage you to take some time and bring those things into your awareness. What are things that I'm thinking that are not truthful and they're not helpful and they're not bearing fruit in my life? So and even like write those down so that when they're not just floating around, but anytime you hear them in your head, you'll notice. And you might not notice every time, and that's not a big deal, but if we're more aware of that, it's less likely to like sneak around in the subconscious areas. Okay, and maybe I should write this stuff down. It might be helpful. Okay, so step one. Know your thoughts.
I feel like you can kind of backtrack to get there too. Like you can take, you know, something that happened or a feeling that you've been having and sort of circle back to it. Like, why is it that every time I'm with so-and-so, I get this feeling, I get angry and I get this and I get that? What should I, you know, go back to that interaction with them and rethink? And that's typically how mine are. Like, I'm not going to have that perfect reframed triangle the first time, but I'm going to be thinking about it after the fact and be like, how did this transpire? What happened? And, you know, how can I circle back?
No, I think that's excellent. And like I said, you're not always gonna catch, because you're going on your daily life. You're not like, it's not like you're gonna be like doing things and then you're gonna hear me in your head. You're gonna be like, oh, let me reframe this. Like, I mean, I hope so, but like,
You never know. It might happen.
it might happen, and you better tell me if it does. But it is also helpful for us to like, after the fact, be like, wait, how did I get here? Or if you find yourself like always feeling a certain way or responding a certain way to people or specific people, or if you notice that like when people act in a certain way, you always have the same feeling reaction, that can be like your clue to go, okay, I should backtrack from here. Like, how did I get here? And that's a thought that maybe I need to be more aware of. And I would say that I've done that before, where I have found myself closing down or found myself avoiding something, and then I've had to say, okay, hold on, let's go back. And then I'm like, that's a thought right there that I want to have some truth for. So thank you, Reese, for that. Okay, so know your thoughts. And then the next step I would say is that you're going to want to surround yourself with truth. So for whatever thoughts it is that you find challenging, have written down or have in your brain or have on your phone the like verses, truth that you know. So, or even like things that like maybe like people around you can remind you of. Like if there's times when you're like feeling like I'm not valuable or I'm not good at this thing, like the truth is that like you are valued. So having that truth written down somewhere or knowing what it is, like Like when I have this thought, here's the truth that I'm gonna bring against that thought. Okay? I don't wanna say. Because your truth thing is problematic. Okay.
I actually think number 2 is problematic in general because
Okay.
of that.
Okay.
Like, I think even if you went around this room, any particular subject, I'm willing to bet there'd be different versions of what's true about that subject. So I would be curious hearing from you, like, how do you determine what is truth? What is true?
Yeah. So, and I think that's great because actually I was, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about when Jesus was in the wilderness and truth was like tempting him, and he had to like it was like verses that were being used against him in that moment, and he perfectly displayed how he was able to like center himself and say, yes, like that's true in its own context, but here is the truth for this moment.
Well, it actually goes back to what you say about the spirit of the thing is more important than the thing. Because at that point, the enemy is just spewing facts. They're not necessarily truth because the spirit behind it is actually manipulation. So you could take that very thing. I could take a scripture in the Bible, or I could take any scripture and bring it to you in manipulation, and it's just a fact because it's in there. It's written. It's been there for 2,000 years, but it's no longer truth because I've used it in a different way. So yeah, that's kind of how that manifests. And with him in the wilderness, he's getting facts, but he's taking facts and he's turning it around and saying, "Let me show you the truth about the facts that you're trying to bring."
Yeah. So, and I see what you're saying, and I guess I'm trying to figure out how would be a different way to write it because, again, I guess.
So I'm not saying you should write it differently.
No.
Honestly,
Okay.
I'm just saying that in my experience of working with people as you have, that truth is very different depending on who you're talking to.
I think it's correct right there. The
too.
problematic part is the manifesting,
Yes,
actually walking it out.
Exactly. I don't
That's
think-
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
No, and I appreciate that you brought that up because it really is important, like very important in this process that if we're going to be reshaping the way that we think, it has to be the truth, not like emotion led or other person. It has to be like as much as possible. You have to really bring those things to like center.
So if we use 2 Corinthians 10 as the kind of criteria, because for me, I just keep coming back to that. Like, I do this a lot. Like, picture myself taking this thought in my hands and presenting it to the Lord, like literally standing it up in front of Him. So for me, like when you say centering yourself, like Jesus centered Himself in the Father, and that's what He did in the wilderness. So I think what we're doing is we're taking any particular thought and we're standing it up before Christ. That's the part of that verse that I think we tend to skip over. We always say, take every thought captive. We forget the rest of what he said there, to the obedience of Christ. Does my thought align itself with who Jesus is? Because that is ultimate truth, in my opinion. And I think my opinion is fact. So,
But a lot of people
There's
think
your
that way.
so like I wish we could all do that, including me. Like I don't do it all the time.
Yeah.
But I know when I do it, it's really healthy.
Yeah.
But for me, that's what you're saying. Is taking this thought and presenting it before the Lord and allowing Him, kind of like Isaac on the altar, do what you want to do.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like the truth is really taking that thought and getting the response then sourced from the Lord instead of sourced from your like pain or
Experience,
your reaction.
Right.
It's saying it's bringing it to the Lord and making sure He's sourcing that response that you're going to have
Right.
to that thought the next time,
Yeah.
which you probably by your own like gut reaction aren't going to have.
Right.
And that's how you know it's gonna be, that's like even points it to being truth and being the Lord, is that it's not your natural response to it.
Yeah.
Is that it's like, you know, when you do something, you're like, that was totally the Lord, because I would never.
I would have done it on my
Right,
own.
yeah.
But like, I'm going back to that first example of her triangle. Like when someone walks by me, they'll say hi to me.
Yeah.
It's really possible they don't like me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have a question about, like, I actually have a problem with the triangle.
Okay.
Because I feel like the triangle is way too linear.
Totally interrupted me. See, that's totally interrupted. But I like it.
What were you gonna say? Was that what you were gonna say?
Yeah, it's okay, good.
No, because I
Sounds so
think
much better coming
I
out of
think
your
there's a
mouth.
suggestion though that just because I reframed something that I was gonna get to the right action. So there are actual pitfalls on each side of the triangle. So I could reframe it and say, there's something wrong with them. And now I'm angry with them because there's something wrong with them, and now I disengage.
Right.
Crap, now I gotta go reframe that again. And that's not how that should work. I could actually have the thought, that person doesn't like me. I could have compassion for that person for not liking me, and then it leading to, hey, is there something between us that we need to work out? And now I got to the point where it's like, you know, I actually got a really valuable thing. It didn't matter if they didn't like me. Ultimately, I needed to engage.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if the triangle had two lines where you had decision points on each side that said,
Changing all
Now
the
it's a
way
matrix.
down.
no, I'm not changing.
Here's the problem. Look, oh Jesus, help us. Because the triangle doesn't involve the Lord. See, I think the Lord comes before the thought. That's the part where, like, I'm trying to wrap my head around the triangle
Yeah.
and bring it into what we know to be truth. And so there are things that we think up there, like you said, it's true but not always helpful. You said that earlier. Very good, because it is true. That person does not like me today. It's daggone true. I have had people walk by me and they don't like me, and that's why they don't say hi to me. And I have to decide what I'm gonna do as a result of that. And so I feel like there has to be like this step before the thought. And I don't, of course, the triangle doesn't work then because it's got like it's hanging by a string, you know, what's it doing? But like, it's who we are and how we have been centering ourselves, kind of back to 40 days in the wilderness before the devil came. So what was happening was he centering himself in the Father all of that time, not eating, not whatever else was going on. And I think it's what was happening in those 40 days. We don't know anything about those 40 days. We only know the 40th, like the last hour of the 40th day or the last day of the 40 days. So that's the part that I would like to kind of bring back into the discussion. I don't know how to do that with your triangle as much as, but like even before the thought comes, like how I experience Ben walking by me and not saying hi to me has so much more to do with where I am than what he is.
Mark, I was thinking that too, like if you, like to the original example, if you think he doesn't like me, it's really like if those emotions result of anger or loneliness or whatever, like it's because you didn't, your complete thought was he doesn't like me and I can't do anything about it, or he doesn't like me and it's all his fault, or like if you're centered in the Lord and your identity as a son, he doesn't like me, you know, like you go explore that further and you can do something about it, so it becomes productive.
Yeah.
If that is the truth.
Right.
But he doesn't like me isn't negative or positive if you're a son.
Right.
It requires further. And the other thing I was thinking is like, oh, he didn't hear me could be just as damaging if he really didn't like you. Like you could just be so aloof to your surroundings that you're like, he must just not heard me. Like you missed the whole opportunity to like bring back relationship because you weren't aware, like in the spirit of other people, you know.
You're exactly right. I'm gonna give you a simple example. Ben, I hear you. Just wait a second.
And I want to disagree with you on something. But go on.
Fine, keep talking. Like this happened to Dawn on Sunday, and it didn't bother her at all, but it bugged the crap out of me. Like I heard her say hello to somebody and like genuinely engage her, and that person totally blew her off. And there was absolutely no way that person did not hear you.
I don't really remember.
I see, you didn't even remember. I was mad for like 20 minutes. I was picturing a scenario where I would walk up to this person And like, in the name of Jesus, like, it was me. Like, I had to deal with that. And so, like, I didn't finish the triangle. Like, I didn't go act out on what I was feeling. So I'm thankful for that. I'm not sure I refrained, but
You took the other path.
I held back. Yeah, I took the other path, right? The other side of the pyramid, right? So here's where I'm going. I feel like there needs to be a grander discussion even before the top point of that triangle, which for me is who are we and what are we doing and how we are spending our time prior to that engagement with not getting healing when we breathe or not experiencing someone's hello or something like that. Like, I feel like, and again, maybe that's just where my brain goes and my spirit goes because that's who I am, is bringing people into a place of sonship. So when this thing happens, there's already this framework that knows exactly what to do when these scenarios take place. So it's probably another Bible study altogether. I'm sorry, but I'm just telling you where my head goes.
Well, I think that's kind of what she's doing too.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you're building yourself up, you're knowing the truth for when that thing happens again,
Right.
and you're preparing yourself.
You're exactly right. Yeah. Go ahead, Ben.
No, you don't. Please.
I just caught myself used to that. Just turning around. I said, over here. I saw Mrs. Dudak here. I didn't say hi. And then when I turned around, you know, following everything going on.
You were the one.
Following everything going on. And then I caught myself. I said, she just said, you don't want you saw me. You didn't say hi to her. And then later on, I turned around. So,
Yeah, sometimes we do that.
Yes.
And thinking,
yeah, thinking, I told him like, oh, she just looked at me and I didn't say anything.
So you were sitting here worried that she was angry.
You sent her off on her own triangle.
Yes.
Yeah, you're in everybody's head.
So basically, that picture, in a thought, I just saw myself in that. And to correct that, to get myself back on the truth, I turn around and I say,
And
It
so
was
that
a
marks
big
the
cut
fourth
off.
edge.
I did feel like you said that earlier though, what is sourcing the triangle?
Yes.
And the idea is that the Lord either comes before the triangle or he doesn't.
Right.
I do feel like you said that.
Yeah, and that is something that should be clear, because I know that like the triangle obviously is a very simplistic way of like being very practical.
I like
day to day.
Yeah.
I like it.
But I do think that that is an important piece, because as I was studying this out, I was like, well, like obviously thoughts are not our ultimate source. Like
Right.
that's not the end all be all. Like all of a sudden, if we change our thoughts, we're not going to alter. Like it's not going to change absolutely everything. It's a tool. So I really do think that piece is important for us to keep in mind. But like, yeah, the triangle is very basic, but the Father needs to be involved in that, because like, yeah, okay, so there are times when maybe like you would see somebody and they're not saying hi, and you could respond in some way, but ultimately we should be sourced in such a way that if somebody doesn't if somebody doesn't respond, if somebody doesn't like me, it's not going to shake my foundation, and that really is important. This is just a tool to help in those like
Yeah.
gap areas. So
I want Ben to disagree with me.
go ahead, Ben.
I think saying that the Lord becomes before the thought kind of goes against our almost priority kind of talk, because then it almost takes him farther away from the feeling and the action. Can I draw something on the board really quick? So in your,
Well, I want to make sure I understand what you just said.
because in your example here, if I have thoughts, feelings, and actions, and if I have the Lord here before the thoughts, then he's farther away from the feelings and the actions. So shouldn't it be the Lord is enveloping this triangle, so he's touching the thoughts, the feelings, and the
I was
actions?
thinking more in time. not in priority.
But I think
Either
either,
prior to the event, I have been with the Lord.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
But then.
yeah, but I don't
so-
know, in practicality, you don't know when the event's coming.
And
So like, you're always trying to be with the Lord, right? Like, so it more needs to be in that, because you may have that feeling faster than you have the thought.
and your
Is
Thought-
that crazy?
well, your thoughts are gonna influence how you spend your time before the event comes, and so it's like
Yeah.
that where I have a hard time imagining I have a hard time imagining a before that cycle, because from before I was conscious, that cycle was happening all the time, and I agree that I think what you said a second ago that you emphasized, Julia, like that thoughts aren't our source,
Mhm.
because it can feel like your thoughts, or it can feel like my thoughts are the substance of who I am, like, because that, I mean, it almost doesn't get more basic in how we think about thoughts. Feels like there isn't anything more basic than thought, right? But what you pointed to was that there is something more basic than thought. Like the Lord can supersede thought and actually be a source that turns into thought.
That being said, I can see it more clearly in the context of linear time. Like that, I can, like, oh, I have been with the Lord, like,
Right, I was just thinking like 10 a.m. someone walks by me in church and say hi to me. But I'm good because all week I have been, like, again, just scenario.
no, yeah.
Yeah.
I have been spending time with, building myself up in the Lord. So, yeah, I don't want to ever see the circle or your circle as separate.
Yeah.
I just meant like, prior sense. I think we're saying the same thing, to be honest.
And
He's just saying it.
Something that I know, something that I'm aware of is a few years ago, I'd say hi and somebody wouldn't respond to me. I'd give them a little finger dance and just go on my way. Okay. Today, consciously, I try not to get excited about it. I try not to, I look at myself and I got things going on in my life. I could be in another world, another whole thought. It's just like, okay, well, you missed an opportunity. I didn't. So take it away off.
No, that's fine. Okay, so a couple things. One being that, like, yes, you're not always like the triangle is not like you are bound to it, but like if I have this thought, then I must have this feeling and then I must act on it. Like that's not like you're like we have self-control. So that's something that I just like what I want to point out there is that like just because you're having that pattern doesn't mean that you're then gonna like automatically ignore that person. That it's not resolute. Those just can be like tendencies. The other thing, because again, I was thinking about like how we can source ourselves because obviously we want to be doing this in the moment, but then beyond that, we really should be like dwelling in the truth. And so it brought me to Psalm 48:9, where it says, "We have thought on your loving kindness, O God, in the midst of your temple."
That's good.
So, I mean, obviously, healthy thoughts come from dwelling and pursuing and like surrounding ourselves in His truth. So if you find that trusting in certain areas or believing certain things is difficult, then I mean, spending time with the person of the Lord, but then also like seeking out where you know His truth to be, that He is faithful, He is kind, He is a good Father. Like those things are true about Him. Like and so having yourself like inundated with that, that should come before any of these other like day-to-day practical things that happen in the moment. Yeah. So another piece that I wanted to well, I guess I should give kind of like step 3 here. And then I have one more piece that I want to do before we go. So, kind of the reframe is basically having like that replacement thought. Which in the triangle with the circle that Ben just drew.
Yeah,
for us
you
here.
can waste the circle.
It's fine, I can, but, our goal in this pattern is that if we find ourselves having an untrue or unhelpful thought, that we would notice it and just have a different thought. Kendall said that a couple weeks ago during when he was teaching, I thought, and I was like, that's a perfect way to put that. Have a different thought. And whatever that might be, having another thought. So that like those feelings in that pattern isn't set into like a negative cycle.
I think some people would say that that's impossible.
Yeah.
Because they've trained themselves to think that certain way, or they've allowed their feelings to dictate their thoughts. To have a different thought, like I think for some of us, even in this room, let alone people that don't come to Bible study, would say, I don't even know what you're talking about. I can't control my thoughts.
And that's where we're going next.
Yeah.
So you can, it's almost, it's like, that's why it's like a habit and a pattern that we get in, like, so yeah, like you're not always gonna be able to prevent a thought from popping into your head, like it's, no. Tell me if you're able to do that, but, I would argue that the more important thing is having that corrective moment afterwards. Again, taking it captive and saying, this is not truth and it doesn't get to be here. So, and so then there are thoughts that like are particularly challenging. And are persistent, and I'm not gonna pretend like that's not the like an experience that we can have. What I would encourage with that is that, one, if you find yourself like chasing around a thought of the truth and it's like kind of like giving you the runaround, don't give it chase. Something that can happen if we are aware of thought patterns that we're in that we like maybe judge ourselves for, or we don't want to be having, or we feel powerless in, if we start to really focus on that, those things kind of dig in. And so that's probably where people can start to feel stuck, is because like if you start to have a thought and you're like, I'm not supposed to be thinking this way, and you start having that like shame and guilt come over you, that's where you can get stuck. And with that, I would encourage that we shouldn't be like, because this is not like a legal thing, like 1 + 1 = 2, like this is what we have to do, and then you have to sit there and have that replacement thought until you're thinking the right way. Like that is not what I am encouraging here. With those really persistent, challenging thoughts, we can just let them sit. And when you do that, like it takes away their power. To just say, okay, you can be there, doesn't mean I have to believe you. And then it has no power over your emotions, because what happens is if we're really resisting something in that way, it can get us frustrated, like, and it makes you feel powerless to be like, oh, like I can't even get rid of this thought. And then it's just, again, that's not a very productive place to be. So just letting it sit and being like, all right, that's fine. When things have settled, the truth is still the truth, and I'm still gonna be in that, and I'm still gonna move forward in that. But this is just something that I know that I have to keep practicing and gently reminding myself of it. And I say that like the gentleness is really important, because again, if we start really trying to dig these things out, we're going to do more harm, and it's going to be more challenging. So, and maybe those are the thoughts that are really important for us to have people around us with, that will say like, it's okay that you're having that thought. We're gonna just, I'm with you and I'm gonna remind you of the truth and you need that.
That's what I was thinking. You said with that point too was like, I think the original thing you said was surround yourself with truth. And like what I first thought of is like surrounding yourself with the people that you know are going to bring you truth. Not surrounding yourself with people that are going to meet you down at that level, that are going to drag you down to another worse level, or and all those sorts of things. And then along with, of course, like sourcing yourself from the Lord, but being around people that are also sourced from the Lord is like helping to break those, I think subconsciously sometimes too.
Well, it's interesting because that verse says we take every thought captive. And we automatically jump to like, I need to take this thought captive. And now you're alone trying to take thoughts captive and you're like,
Yeah.
man, I'm failing. Like,
Yeah.
they're coming at me from everywhere. And I think we skip over the we part a lot.
Well, how often have you ever taken a thought that you've had and like you brought it to someone and be like, I feel like when I said that word up today at church, it just fell flat and I don't think anybody understood it and it was useless. And then the person's like, no, like, did you see the people sobbing in the background? Like that's the kind of thing, like when we bring in other people, it helps to break that,
Right, because you can continue to spin and spin and spin. But the thing about like those kinds of thoughts is if we voice them around people who are gonna like catch them with us, it doesn't have that same impact. So and part of what I wanted to do, which I guess is to encourage you guys that as you have that list of things like thoughts that you're being more mindful of, having people that are aware of that with you, so that when they notice those things, like, because the people who are close to you will notice it. They probably already noticed it. They're just waiting for you to notice it. And they can lovingly say, hey, like, is this an area where we can like bring truth? And I was thinking something else with that. Yeah.
So I have battled this stuff for like a while, but anyway, what I was gonna say is sometimes you can get in the habit of going to people and rely on that. So I was just gonna make a point of that it's good to have people that will tell you, okay, you know the truth, you got this, because otherwise you can become reliant on it sometimes, not like in the beginning, but like as time goes on, you get to rely on.
Thank you. So the thought that I was having as well here is that when it comes to those kind of things that can dig in, particularly I think about areas where like we know what the truth is in this thing, and then we judge ourselves for not having thoughts that align with that truth. I don't know if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. But so basically, it's this idea that like you're going through your day and you say something to somebody. Or so this is an example of something that I would do. Like if I have an interaction with a coworker, and then afterwards I could have the thought of like, well, there you go. Like, like you operated outside of your identity, and like having a thought of like, you shouldn't have been acting that way. You shouldn't have this. You shouldn't have that. And I catch myself and I'm like, oh, hold up. Like, so I guess the idea there is that when we're thinking of things or we're acting a certain way, we have a tendency to like immediately judge it and say, well, that's not how I'm supposed to be acting. That's not how I'm supposed to be thinking. And then that's what brings like more isolation, because then it's like, well, how am I going to like share that thought with somebody else and ask them to bring this into the truth with me? But then also it's like, well, I should know better. Why am I having these kinds of thoughts? And so that's, again, I just want to encourage you guys that in areas where that's happening, you don't have to like judge it. You don't have to like push yourself or like feel like you've like somehow like majorly overstepped things. You don't have to even claim every thought as your own. And I guess I say that because sometimes, like, we have a thought and it can be like, well, where did that even come from? And sometimes, but then it's like, well, because I thought it, it's mine.
Yeah.
Because it came from my head, so it must be mine. Not true. False. Like, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I said earlier, just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. And also, just because you are having the thought doesn't mean that it's yours.
I think that gives, like, that alone right there is the reason why Jesus could be tempted in every way like us and not sin. Which means he thought all of the thoughts.
Yeah.
That we think. He just didn't act on any of them.
Or indulge in the thoughts.
Right, or indulge them.
Mhm.
So I think if you ask me, he was the perfect example of what you just said. He didn't own any of those. He didn't say any of those were his, but he recognized that they were real. I think that's okay to say. That's real. But my Father, or but God, we just keep referring back to that. That's why I think the key of this entire discussion is that simple verse of, I will take this thought and I will stand it before Jesus, and I will let him have his way with it. You're right. I will.
So I guess that's like Mark was saying, that really is truly like what I was hoping to share, is that we would take some of these things and make them very practical. Because again, I can see how important this could be for each of us individually and for our family. If we're thinking in new ways. Where just because we haven't done something before doesn't mean that it can't be done. Or just because I've thought about myself this way before doesn't mean that that's how I'm always going to think about myself or how I have to think about myself. Like, I can choose how I'm going to think about me. And if you're finding that you're stuck in like negative thoughts where you're like, I can't do this, or I'm limited here, I would really encourage you to be challenging those. Because I don't see biblical evidence that that's how we should be thinking. That like, I am not capable, I can't do this, I am alone, like those kind of things. I don't think that that's how we should be like feeding ourselves. Yes.
I would like to support what you're saying. For a private, I don't know how to say that, if it's a private or some sort of way some people think about where I come from. I met this guy here at the hospital, and later on, because one day he said that we, the human, were the only species that limit ourselves to anything. That when we get to one level, we don't want to grow any further than that. Take an example of a tree. A tree, no matter where the circumstances, where the tree will grow. The tree will never say, I want to stop over here. It will still grow until it's time to stop. So if you work at the warehouse, if you clean the toilet, if you sweep the road, whatever you do, it's up to you to decide to go from there. So to never stop yourself from growing from the step where you are to the next step.
Yeah.
And that it just grows some sort of energy out of just me. That's the way I feel.
And yeah, there's life in that. These thoughts that we have that are like, well, gosh, I'm trying to think of like a good, like really practical example.
Like you said, I'm introverted.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm an introvert, right? I'm not gonna go talk to people because I'm an introvert.
Yeah, but even like thinking specifically, like as we're revealing more characteristics of Jesus, and that's our goal. I guess like the piece here is that, that's really what I was hoping that we could take from this is that I want for us to stop using, like having our thoughts and limit us from seeing a more full expression. And I really do think that this can be like a way that happens. I'm not finding the words to say it how I want to. I guess what I would say is that it's like, it's not empowered sometimes how we think. Yeah, I'm having a hard time. Okay, so I guess I'll try to figure out a way to put this the way I want it. If as a family, individually, we are thinking about like the skills that we have, or the pieces of ourselves, pieces of our identity that we have, and we are viewing it in a very narrow way. I want us to open that up, and take those things before the Lord and say, well, is this really like how you see me? Is this really the full expression of this area of myself? And how can like these other pieces come into alignment with that? I guess is what I want to just encourage you guys with, is that I want for our family to be able to not be self-deprecating and not feel like we have to like limit ourselves and talk about ourselves in a certain way, but to really kind of push forward and say, yes, it's okay for me to feel confident in this area. It's okay for me to know who I am and own those things and have my thoughts align with the Father's thoughts of me. Like from there, opportunity is endless. Like really, you think about it, like it's just, I mean, it's amazing. Like a tree that never stops growing. That's what we have before us. Like there's constant opportunities for growth. If we're not choosing to like indulge those unhelpful thoughts that say, well, you can't do that, or you're not capable of that. Let me just make sure that
Did you give us point 3?
I did, and then I didn't write it down.
I have replacement thoughts.
Okay.
Which I kind of did.
I was just thinking too, it seems healthy, like the triangle is balanced and there should be a balance between like thinking, feeling and doing. And we can get so stuck in the thinking and the feeling and not enough doing. And then it should be a like, once you do, like this is too simplistic, but once you do, you should move on to a new thought. Like, okay, I did it, it changed me, I'm now more mature and prepared, and now I can move on to something else instead of cycling back to the same thought over and over and over again. Like, so we can advance and do what you just said.
And the other thing that I know what I was trying to say, now I'm like getting a better angle on it. So there was a time for me when, because I'm gonna use myself as an example here, when I thought about myself in a certain way, like of feeling like what if I believe these things and then they're not true? So like, what if I go out on a limb and I start to believe the things that I'm hearing are being said about me, like positive things. And I think that sometimes that can be like a barrier. And that's something important that I wanted to point out. Like we can have these barriers, but there's that barrier there of like thinking in a different way, because we're like, well, what if I think good things about myself? What if I start like acting acting in a way that's bold and people are like, that's not true, or like, you know, like what would happen? Like, and really like in that moment, I just had to tell myself, the decision that I made was like, well, like, even if this is not true, how is being limited and believing like that I'm not powerful, how is that helping anybody or anything? How is that helping any circumstance? Like, I just don't see. So I guess that's that's another piece there is to say, well, like, how is being limited? How is thinking negative thoughts? How is like fueling those kinds of things in a negative direction? How is that helping you or helping people around you? Because maybe it's comfortable and maybe it seems like that's what everybody does and that's what we've always done. But your feelings, the way you interact with people around you, it will be different if you're choosing to be centered in this way. And you do have the power to change it. So again, we'll just to go through here. Know the thoughts that are challenging for you. Surround yourself with truth. I know I wrote prepare, but we'll say that. Surround yourself with truth, which means like people and then have another thought. When those thoughts come up, have another thought. Any other thoughts or questions? Because that's the stuff that I had for us.
Thanks, Julie.